Well, hi everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Godcast. My name is Father Alex. I'm the vicar of St Matthew's Church in Burnley. I'm the host of the Godcast. I'm also the author of Our Daily Bread from Argos to the Altar, a priest story which is available in all good bookshops and online. My guest today on the Godcast is Peter Oborne. Peter is a political journalist. He's an author and he is a broadcaster. So I do hope you enjoy the interview. If you do, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, or perhaps follow me on X, where you'll find me at AlexDJFrost. But for now, enjoy this interview with Peter Oborne. Well, delighted to say that joining me on the Godcast this week is Peter Oborne. Peter, how are you?
I'm I'm managing. Thank you very much. Just back from Jerusalem.
Yeah, well, probably a good place to start, Peter. You are a man of a certain vintage. You are, well honed in political matters. I was wondering, Peter, where in that long line of experiences that you've had, does what is happening in the Holy Land and the Middle East sit with you right now?
Um, I'm. It's very profound and terrible what is happening. Can't tell you how shocking what is going on is. And I suppose if you are a Christian, you are very conscious of the experience of Jesus Christ and what he taught about human suffering and and how to respond to it. Um, but what is, we are now seeing the slaughter of, so thousands upon thousands of people in Gaza and now in Lebanon. It's being broadcast by very brave uh, Palestinian journalists who many of whom have been killed, of course, well over 100. The British government seems very easy with this, not to worry too much. In fact, supporting it. The same applies to the Conservative Party opposition, which is strongly supporting Israel throughout all of this. It's pushed. And of course, we have what is going on in the West Bank, which I spent a lot of time in the West Bank while I was there, where you have the theft of state-sponsored settler terrorism, which again the British government harumphs about a little bit, but really doesn't. There are no consequences for the Israelis, no serious consequences.
Just tell us about where you've been in recent weeks, Peter, and some of the things that you've witnessed with your own eyes and ears.
Well, when I go to Jerusalem, I do stay in the Anglican cathedral as a sort of pilgrim's house. I would really recommend, if you are an Anglican, to try and stay there. There's a church service every day. It's a wonderful service on Sundays in the cathedral. There's a very impressive bishop, Richard Sewell, the dean. I think you know him. Is a phenomenal man. Does a wonderful job with his wife, Julianne. But when I go there, I work. I tend to do some work with Middle East Eye, which I write I'm a political columnist for them, or I do reporting. And I also have friends across the West Bank. I spent some time in Nablus, which I know very well, which is a wonderful Roman city built by Vespasian in 72 AD, shortly after he'd destroyed Jerusalem. And it's built on the same site, or just adjacent to the same site, where the old city, the biblical city of Shechem, which was the capital of Israel, wasn't it, for many hundreds of years. And I stayed there. It's a fascinating place. It was built as a Roman city, and it's got the same the road structure as Vespasian gave it in 72 AD. It's got the Roman canal running underneath the city. You can still see the Roman features. In fact, it's there, but then of course it then becomes a Christian city with as the Roman Emperor goes on, and then it becomes a Muslim city. And all the public buildings, they've been Roman, then they've become Byzantine, and they've become Muslim. It's very Ottoman, and another, I don't know what you call them, but Palestinian. I mean, it's under threat, of course, from the settlement of the Israeli settlers, with the IDF come in a lot. And when I was there last year, every morning you wake up to a gunfight. But it's the neighboring villages which I do visit, and I have friends in these villages, and they are all under attack by these militant, extremist, violent, state-sponsored settlers set on the destruction of their property and the theft of their land. Are normally heavily armed and protected by the IDF. It's quite disgusting that this sort of conduct should happen, actually. It's beyond belief.
Yeah, I was in the Holy Land just a few years ago, and Palestinian Christian who had a property in the old city was basically hoofed out and told that his house wasn't fit for purpose. And they, of course, they would never let him back to do the work that they said was needed. This is the kind of thing that you see, isn't it, Peter?
All the time. I mean, there's a place called Beta, which is a village nearby. I went up there this time, which is where 16 unarmed men have been shot dead, or women. The latest one was a woman in the last few years. They're guardians of the mountain. This illegal settlement is set up, backed by some American money. It's illegal even under Israeli law. All settlements, remember, are completely illegal under international law. In fact, the International Court of Justice has ordered Israel to get out of the West Bank, which incorporates most of what you would think of as Holy Land: Bethlehem, Hebron, Sebastia, all these famous, wonderful places, and Israel is there. It's taking them over, and it's clearly a very concerted, deliberate attempt by the settler movement, which now largely governs Israel through Itamar Ben-Gvir, the security minister responsible, and Benazir Smotrich, who is the administrator for the West Bank. And so you're seeing all of these famous, wonderful places, including Bethlehem, the birthplace, under attack all the time. It's just staggering. I can't understand. When these settler violence occurs, you'll get a condemnation by the British Consul General. They're very concerned when somebody's murdered or something. But they have recently started to sanction the odd settler organization. It's not nearly enough. They have to sort of say to Israel, this isn't on at all. We're going to sanction. We're going to sanction. We can't. Israel is still allowed to do business from the settlements, from the illegally occupied settlements, which are committing barbarous acts against the local Palestinian population. Britain really has to say, look, this isn't on at all. We're going to sanction. We're not going to ban. We're banning trade with the settlements. We're going to sanction Ben-Gvir, Smotrich, and anybody in the Israeli government, including the settlers themselves. But we were somehow ashamed to do that. I can't understand.
Yeah.
And the church, the Archbishop of Canterbury got off to a terrible start on this. He's been but he is getting better, I feel. He is getting more outspoken.
Just unpack that a little bit, Peter. In what way do you feel he got off to a terrible start?
I was there in Jerusalem when he, just after October the 7th, he turned up and there was a letter got out calling for a ceasefire, which he by the other churches in Jerusalem. And he was very slow and rather sort of to get involved with that letter. He didn't come back to Britain and say that then there must be, that he speak the language of that letter. And there was a statement issued where he sort of linked himself, but didn't, to the letter, to this statement, very strong statement from the other church leaders in Jerusalem. But more recently, I get a sense that he is beginning to understand the magnitude of what is happening at the moment.
Yeah, that's really encouraging to hear. Just when I was talking to Richard Sewell, he talked about another thing he talked about, Peter, was this kind of incarceration of people without any justification. Have you seen and heard of that yourself?
Well, when I was last on this trip, I arrived and there was, you could put it out, it's available. There was footage taken by a private individual of a man coming out of a jail in the Negev. He couldn't walk properly. He clearly didn't know the time of day. He was, and one of his arms jutted out like this. It was obviously broken. And so I went and I found out where he was. I went to visit him. He was in a hospital in Bethlehem. His story was just dreadful. He came from Bethlehem. He'd been the Israelis raided his house at 3 a.m. He had 4 children, a pregnant wife. Because they trashed the house as well. They took him away. Basically, he was beaten. My article about this is on the Middle East Eye website. If anybody wants to read it, he was beaten for 9 months. He was given a thorough beating and then taken somewhere else. And wherever he was taken, they took an opportunity to beat him, kick him, unbelievable stuff. But he said that the worst was when he reached the jail in the Negev. It was worse by far than these days. In the jail in the Negev, it was the middle of winter. The food was so disgusting he couldn't really eat it. He was in a cell of 10 people, and they were shared a litre of water a day. He lost well over half his body weight in those 9 months. He got Moazaz, his name. When we came into the room where the hospital room, he thought that we were Israelis. He was worried. He was saying, "Don't beat me." He didn't. He said, "My head is still in the prison." Now, and he also said in the neighbouring cell, somebody had been beaten to death. Well, I looked into that. It's very well documented. Those are the conditions which he was never charged with anything at all. By the way, never charged with anything at all. And the human rights organisations confirm this is what's been going on. That is the experience of every Palestinian. This was a West Bank Palestinian, not from Gaza. It's like, from memory, I think it was like 9,000 or 10,000 of these Palestinians in these jails, and they're all. It's not just him. That's what happens in these jails. That's what it's like now. It's grotesque. It's against every. What it reminds me of is Abu Ghraib. Do you remember that after the American barbarism in Iraq? I'd say it's worse than Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo because it's on a much larger scale. It's the fate of every Palestinian, let alone what's going on in Gaza, where they get stripped and taken away. And of course, you have your hands behind your back, and it grates into your wrists, and again you get beaten. And in fact, it emerged shortly after I interviewed Moazaz that there was a case where Israeli soldiers, and I think it's not unusual, sodomized a prisoner. This was on the footage. It was emerged on Israeli TV, and then it led to a national debate in Israel: should Israeli soldiers sodomize prisoners? It wasn't. It was with an object, and it caused horrible internal, as you can imagine, damage. And generally, a lot of it was, good breakfast TV, like the equivalent of GMTV. I think they should. They deserve it. I mean, that's the national narrative now. This isn't just me speaking. These are formal official reports. It's stuff which is going on in national television. It's being justified. I went on my most recent trip to Israel to this extraordinary event on the Gaza, on the border, just on the border between Israel and Gaza, at the front line, as it were. It was in a military camp, military base, and they had a settler conference. It was about the occupation, the settlement of Gaza. And it wasn't just that you had the senior settler people talking about, just moving in, property prices will be cheap, it will be, and they got the plans already. I said, what about the people who are already there? Well, they'll be moved out. We don't care what happens to them, or but of course, this is ethnic cleansing. This is war crimes being contemplated. By the way, they're committed daily anyway in Gaza. I mean,
you paint a very stark and harrowing image, Peter. I was reading your article this morning where you really do condemn David Lammy, for denying such atrocities. Just what do you think is the rationale or the thinking of governments, not just the British governments, but other governments? From afar, to me, it looks like they're almost powerless. What's your take on things?
Well, the British government, to be fair to the Starmer administration, the government, they've been better than the Conservatives, who gave completely unequivocal support from the start until July the 4th for Israel. That included trying to stop the ICC call for arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Gallant in relation to their genocidal statements. It included cutting off funding for UNRWA, the British funding for UNRWA, which is the only agency which can get food, humanitarian aid into Gaza in substantial quantities, and the wretched David Cameron accepted some sort of very flimsy, evidence-free dossier from Israel, making out that there was Hamas involvement in UNRWA on October the 7th. Then there was the issue of the ICJ, International Court of Justice, announced it. Well, South Africa made its case to the ICJ that there should be an investigation for a plausible genocide. And Cameron and Britain trashed that. They trashed the ICJ. They trashed the the South African case. And David Lammy's remarks must be seen in that context, because he was asked by a Tory MP, Nick Timothy, on Monday to say that there wasn't a genocide going on. I think I'm talking from memory now, but it was the genocide was the wrong language to use about what's going on in Gaza. Lammy started off his answer okay. He said, look, this is a matter for the courts, and it is indeed going through the most senior court in the world, this decision. But then he said, well, then he went on to redefine what genocide was in terms which would not be recognized by any of the leading organizations which deal with this subject, i.e. he said, it's largely over 1 million people. And I think he said something like, to talk about genocide in connection with Gaza, it's to diminish or to sort of minimize. You've seen the piece more recently than me. What it means, the term genocide means. Well, he'd actually, in doing that, he'd redefined the definition of genocide as it is generally accepted by the Genocide Convention, by the Lemkin Institute, which was founded by the man who coined the term, etc. And it's left a huge ambiguity because Lamy was basically saying that the Israelis are not committing genocide. And he's also, I think, saying that he won't accept, or Britain won't accept, the judgment of the ICJ when it and if it comes. And he needs to clear this up because does Britain not accept the globally accepted definition of genocide in the case of Gaza? That is the sort of territory which the British Foreign Secretary, through his very clumsy language, has got us into, because he's our Foreign Secretary, has got Britain into.
And Peter, I want to ask you, I'm just mindful of time. What do you think the end game is for Netanyahu? Firstly, in something like the Gaza Strip, from afar, it looks like it's just been flattened effectively. And what happens after that? What do you think will happen after that? And actually, in the wider conflict in the Middle East, where is his end game? Where does he stop?
Well, you've got to distinguish between what Netanyahu says and what he does. And what he has said, he doesn't want to settle Gaza. Well, and so the Palestinians are going on living there. On the other hand, the latest sort of development is the so-called Generals Plan, when they're cleansing, ethnically cleansing. I think it has to be the definition. It's against international law. It's a war crime, but they're driving the Palestinians out. They're driving them south, and the ones that remain, they're under attack. Horrible attack, hundreds. We have almost every day at the moment, it seems 100 get killed. I mean, it is one of the things you do see is the pictures. I've seen all the pictures. It's barbarism. And if you, but looking aside, Netanyahu, he's now launched this campaign in Lebanon. And they bomb Syria a lot. What are his objectives? Well, one of them is to keep out of jail, because if he ceases to be Israeli prime minister, he will face a barrage of corruption charges, and there is a problem here, because he only can carry on so long as keep out of jail, keep out of being held to account on these corruption issues by remaining prime minister. The hostages, mind you, their families, a lot of them are appalled by what Netanyahu is doing. They want a deal for their hostages, their sons and daughters. And they're not going to get that while Israel is being as aggressive under Netanyahu as it is. And so what is his long-term objective? Well, he said it's to defeat Hamas, no sign of that, to eliminate Hezbollah, no sign of that. The idea that one should sort out these terrible issues through negotiations, talks, etc., it isn't in his mind. And it's not just me saying this, it's the defense minister, Gallant, has said this, that Netanyahu doesn't want, he's the main obstacle to a ceasefire.
It's very sad, particularly my bishop is Bishop Philip Northam, and he said to me, when you go to the Holy Land, it will change you in many ways, and it has. And one of the ironies that I think is not lost on me, Peter, is that when I went to the Holy Land a couple of years ago, people were worried about me going, all the kind of stuff in the air, the news in the air. But when I was there in the old city, I felt incredibly peaceful. I felt incredibly at ease. I felt incredibly spiritual. I never felt worried for my safety. I think that's an irony that's not lost on me, is that whilst at times it is the most fragile place in the world, when it's not all kicking off, it really is a place of beauty. I'm just wondering how it affects you on a spiritual level, Peter, when you're there or in those same places, Bethlehem or Jerusalem.
Yeah. Well, it is very profound. I mean, as you say, going around the old city, I was going to pray at it's a church of the Holy Sepulchre, isn't it, in the old city?
Yeah.
I mean, it's an incredible place. I always go to where Christ was allegedly, I think it was crucified. I go there and I always pray, because of course Christ's stories talk so directly to what is going on. And in the West Bank is also safe. If you go with Palestinians, you're incredibly welcome. They have to go quite often. The journeys are quite laborious because you've got to go up into the hills through farm tracks to avoid checkpoints and settlers. When you're in Nablus, I feel that they take me to their hearts, and you go to these in Sebastia, for instance, which is under attack from settlers all the time. But you go to the place where Herod ordered John the Baptist's head on a platter, and you can go to the old church where his body was in the catacomb for about 4 years. You can go down into the steps into that place, and you can stand where John the Baptist's wife. Things like that are just. I'll tell you, actually, it was I did this I had a terrible knee issue, and I could hardly walk. And I staggered down there to where John had been for 400 years after he had been murdered by Herod. And I prayed, of course. But I didn't pray for myself, even though I could hardly walk, because I thought that's out of order. I like to pray for the Palestinians, those I love, but I think I don't pray. I walked out of there, and my leg was. It didn't hurt at all. For the remainder of my time, it was fantastic. My leg was in rip-roaring shape.
Wow.
Even walking up to these huge Ottoman steps. Yeah. And I don't know, but I do feel that John the Baptist actually may have had a say in all of that.
Be nice to think so, wouldn't it? Yes. Yeah. And a final question, Peter. Do you think the Middle East is beyond peace? Is peace possible?
It depends. It needs I'm afraid that Israel is out of control. And it needs Britain, above all, it needs America to stop this. And it could do. It's one thing really, I have to tell you, in 1982, when Israel invaded Lebanon, terrible war crimes, though they're nothing like the scale of what's going on now. Maggie Thatcher rang up Begin, or told Begin, stop doing this. And so did Ronnie Reagan. And he said, actually, if you want any more weapons from us, you're not going to get them unless you. And within half an hour, Begin had stopped the grotesque human rights abuses being carried out by Israel in South Lebanon. Now, I don't understand why, and both of them were pro-Israel. Maggie was really pro-Israel, but they were also pro-human rights. Now, Starmer, Sunak, let alone Joe Biden, they don't seem to have the same moral structure. I think it tells us a lot about the sort of people we are. We have become immune to barbarity and atrocities and actually when Begin, he was so incensed that Maggie had rung him up and told him that he had to pull himself together and stop doing this. He called her up, and she wouldn't even take his call. And she called this barbarism. And why Western leaders today are unable, because we are the ones supplying the arms, the diplomatic protection. As I told you, David Cameron was stopping aid to UNRWA. He won't allow. He tried to stop the ICC, and so far that hasn't happened. The ICC criminal warrant out from Netanyahu and Galad. Yeah. So what's gone wrong with our leaders? I think the Archbishop of Canterbury is now saying some very important things. The Pope Francis has been magnificent. Mm. I'm going to tell you something about him. It's just very moving. There's a Catholic church. I think it's called the Church of the Holy Family because Jesus, Mary, and Joseph went through Gaza on their way to Egypt. There's a church, I've been there, and there's a Catholic priest. I knew the previous one, not the. He's been recently replaced. Pope Francis rings up the Catholic priest in Gaza every night to learn what's going on. I think that's, and he's made some very important statements. That's, I think, leadership.
I think so, and I've published my own. Well, HarperCollins have published my book, but in there, Peter, I raised some of the things you've said. There is what has happened to our country, where we've become almost heartless, haven't we? And we seem immune as a nation to genocide and horrors. I'm not saying people don't care, but there seems to be a lack of care, and I don't know if that's one we can solve. But I do hope people have well, I don't think enjoyed is the right word, but I hope people have found this conversation informative and useful. And I appreciate you going out there, Peter, because people need to hear stories from the ground, and I think stories are a profound way of changing society. So I thank you very much for doing that, and I thank you for coming on the Godcast.
Of course, real pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.